G'day, legends. Welcome to the Cold Exposure Hot Topics podcast. I'm your host, Trav Dittmar, and a big thank you to Mind Over Matter Practice down in Victor Harbour for sponsoring the show. I'm joined today by King's Counsel Stephen Pallaras. Steve, how are you?
Trav, very well, thank you. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me into your home today. It's a beautiful property, and it's great to be here.
It's our pleasure.
Fantastic. So, for those of you who aren't necessarily familiar with Steve's work, Steve, could you give us a little bit of a soldier's five on what it is you do?
Historically, I've always been a lawyer. I graduated a long time ago in Melbourne. It was at the bar as a barrister in the Victorian bar for 10 years. We went from there to Hong Kong, where I was a prosecutor for the British government up there for 10 years. And then we went to Western Australia, where my wife Stacey is from, and we lived and I practiced law in Western Australia. Then I was appointed Director of Public Prosecutions for South Australia in 2005 and held that position for 7 years. And from there, we went to the Solomon Islands, where I was a judge for 3 years. So I've been around the world with a wig, and it's been an interesting career.
Wow, yeah. So you've certainly done a lot, and it's spanned a few decades. And what was it initially that attracted you to the legal system in general?
There was a TV show which you're probably far too young to recall. It was a guy in America, an American attorney called Perry Mason, and I used to watch that as a kid. Mum and Dad had her on the TV set, and I'd see how he would always win these cases, and he had this beautiful assistant, and he had some other bloke who would help him out finding out witnesses. And I thought, well, that's not a bad way to make a quid. And he won by simply talking. I thought, well, if I can make money by talking, well, I can talk well enough, so I'll give that a try. That was the initial inspiration. But after that, it was simply a desire to get involved in the criminal law of the country.
Yeah, wow, fantastic. So, before we go into the too historical, I should say, when you were appointed the Director of Public Prosecutions, it was quite a turbulent time. What was the main driver for your, I suppose, motivation to restore the public trust in the justice system?
I was very disappointed with how my predecessor, a man by the name of Mr. Paul Grove, who was DPP then, was treated by the government. And when I was appointed, I felt that I had to uphold the traditions of a Director of Public Prosecutions, which is that he is an independent officer of the law, and he is not to be interfered with by any politician, including the Attorney General, and in our case, including the Premier. And there were several times in which we did clash, basically over the issue about who decides what in my job. And so we've raised a few headlines and a few disputes over that. And from then on, I felt that it was my task to represent the interests of the people of South Australia, because after all, it was their taxes that were paying my salary. And I took the view that I wasn't the Director of Public Prosecutions for the government. I was the Director of Public Prosecutions for the people of South Australia. And that motivated me, and I got a lot of support from public emails and messages, and people in the street would stop me. And it was a very satisfying experience.
Yeah, fantastic. So basically bringing the power back to the people in a legal sense, and
well, at least being accountable to the people, not being accountable to a minister or a particular premier, because the director had his or her own piece of legislation which guaranteed independence from political intervention and political influence, and that was being ignored. And I stood on my digs in relation to that and said, you're not going to tell me what to do because I have independence from you.
Fantastic. And definitely a sorely needed change at the time, and it's certainly, I'm sure, spurred on subsequent changes in the legal system. What was paramount to you in terms of changing the way the justice system is not only perceived, but actually utilised within the state?
Couple of things on different levels. The first was the workload that our DPP's office had, it was the highest in Australia, it was the heaviest workload in Australia. We had a lot of young lawyers who had seen what had happened to Mr. Rove and decided to leave the DPP because they didn't want to be chastised effectively or criticised by the government. And the biggest task I had was to get people back on side and saying, look, we can do a good job here. When that dispute sort of blew over, which took some time, a couple of years, I would have thought, maybe even longer, I started to look at what was happening in our sentencing and the way the courts were sentencing, and in particular in relation to domestic violence and those sorts of cases and those sorts of issues, and also in relation to the issue of parole. I thought the whole idea of parole was ridiculous and it ought to be abandoned. But what took my mind was the degree of violence that was occurring in our community, particularly to women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating. And we will certainly dive into that in much greater detail. But I'd like to take a step back to one of your responses there. What is it about the parole system that you find, as you said, ridiculous?
It gives prisoners time off for obeying the law. Yeah. In other words, an experienced judge, criminal judge, assesses the right penalty for a particular offence, but then the legislation requires that judge to pass what's called a non-parole period. So you might get a 10-year sentence for a robbery with a non-parole period of 5 years. That means that if you behave yourself, after 5 years you can go before the parole board and they will generally let you out on parole. Now, the only reason that they are let out on parole is because they haven't bashed another prisoner or hit a water over the head with their food tray. And if they behave themselves, they'll get released. Now, they're meant to behave themselves in jail. And this whole concept of ignoring what the original judge said was worthy of this penalty, namely 10 years, we ignore that. And then the judge is forced to guess. And he's forced to guess, when will this person be fit and safe to release back into the community? And he guesses 5 years. Then the prisoner goes before the parole board and they're forced to guess, will he be safe enough to be released into the community? And they guess yes or no. Problem with it is this: they are meant to behave themselves in jail. If the penalty is appropriately judged by a criminal lawyer as being, a criminal judge as being 10 years, it should be 10 years. And then the other factor about it is this, that 40% those who are released on parole are back in jail within 2 years.
Wow.
So it doesn't make any sense, and two, it's not working.
Yeah, fair enough. And I suppose, the question then is that all the criteria really is for the basis of parole? Is have they behaved? There's no rehabilitation metrics they have to meet.
That's exactly right. And the people who argue against me on this make 2 points. One, they say it encourages people to behave themselves in jail. And secondly, they say it helps to rehabilitate them when they get out into the community. Well, the answer to those questions is this. If instead of giving them time off for behaving themselves, they should do the sentence that was adjudged appropriate. And then if they misbehave, we add on a bit.
Mm.
And that will encourage people to not only serve out the sentence that was adjudged appropriate, but it will encourage people not to misbehave. The second argument about encouraging them to rehabilitate, that starts on the day they get out of jail. Why wait until then? We can start on day one when they're incarcerated, and they've got 10 years to get practice.
Mm.
And for whatever the sentence is, 5 years or 6, whatever the sentence is, they've got all that time in which they can be given the appropriate help and counselling that they will need. We don't have to wait until we let them out. Find that within 2 years, 40% of them are back in jail.
It's a very, very good point, and I'm quoting a bit of my Year 12 legal studies here in the arms of the purposes of the judicial system. And, you've got punishment and deterrence. And I suppose if you're saying, oh, yeah, this crime is actually worth 10 years, but hey, 5 years' time you might be able to get out. It's not really doing either thing, is it?
No, it's not. And what really has shocked me recently is that, and your listeners will know about the bodies in the barrel cases, they're even talking about giving an early release on parole to people who are involved in that. Now, that tells me something. It tells me that the legal system doesn't regard any crime as being too serious for it not to be eligible for parole, because you can't imagine any worse crimes than those, yet that we're talking about letting them out early. And to me, that's just an injustice.
Absolutely, and it pertains to the Snowtown, or the town of Snowtown itself, and you only have to ask people in that community how they feel about that as well, because that's what they're known for now.
Yeah.
And if these people are going to be released back into the community, well, who's to say that the town isn't going to get a bad name again as a result of these people, maybe going back there?
That's right. That's one aspect. The other aspect is who's to say they're not going to kill again?
Yeah, exactly right.
Because they've killed half a dozen people, and they're out on the streets. Well, to me, that is not justice. It's not justice for the families of the deceased. It makes it very difficult to keep someone else who hasn't killed that many people in jail, because they will say, well, those blokes got out on parole. Why can't I get out on parole? So it disturbs the whole system of penalty fitting the crime.
Absolutely. So what would it take to, I guess, begin to dismantle the legislation around parole?
Not much. It's simply you remove the section in the Sentencing Act which requires judges to impose a non-parole period, and from then on you say that what you get is what you serve. So it doesn't take much at all. You might want to leave an out for exceptional cases, although I can't think of any at the moment, but it won't take much to say that sentences should mean what they say. And that's as little as you need to do to amend the legislation.
Yeah, and I can imagine there will be opposition to that, as there is with anything like that. And you've presented the arguments as to why that argument is sort of invalid, I suppose.
Yeah.
Now, heading back down the path of the domestic violence side of things, because you mentioned that earlier, and it is something that even back when you were DPP was something of passion towards for you, I should say. How does the justice system treat people who are victims of domestic violence currently, and what would you like to change about that?
It treats them very poorly. They are insufficiently funded, or the whole area is insufficiently funded. There are far too few refuges for women who find themselves in danger. The manner in which the police are trained is not good enough. The manner in which lawyers and the court systems deal with them are not good enough. They should equally be changed. And for instance, what happens when, or before I say that, there is a Royal Commission going on at the moment in Adelaide on domestic violence. And the Commissioner has heard evidence from high officers in the police force saying that there are 100 calls a day that that the police officers have to attend, and they spend an average of 3 to 3.5 hours per call. Now, there's 300 and 350 hours of police work doing domestic violence replies or responses, and no wonder people say you can't find a good cop when you need one. I don't blame the police. They're under-resourced. They're under-financed. And when I say under-trained, what they typically do is they go into a house in response to a call, and they see usually the woman is the victim. They see the woman either crying or bleeding or holding the kids or hiding. The bloke typically is on his armchair having a beer, watching the cricket, saying nothing to see here. The police then typically they take the woman and the kids out of the house, leaving the perpetrator of the assault in the house. And they then wish the woman the best of British luck trying to find somewhere to sleep that night. That, to me, is nonsense. They should take the perpetrator out of the house give him the best of British luck in trying to find somewhere to sleep, keep the women and children under the protection and the warmth and the safety of the house, and get the bloke out of the house, get the perpetrator out of the house, and follow it up with this, that he may not be permitted to come back to the house or to annoy or to irritate or to criticise the woman, either by telephone or by driving up and down the streets as they sometimes do, or by using social media or by any other media, and not come within 5 kilometres of the house at pain of being immediately arrested, put in custody without bail. Now, that system can be monitored by electronic means. We need money to do it. We've got money to do it. We're not spending it on that. We're not spending it on refuges. We're spending it on Live Golf. We're spending it on Gather Round, which is fine. I like sports too, but let's get our society safe first. The other thing we need is a woman can, if she apprehends violence, get an apprehended violence order, an AVO it's called, the magistrate's court. Trouble with that is she goes down Monday morning to the magistrate's court and waits. And waits and waits and waits. And if she's dealt with by Wednesday or Thursday, she's done very well. Because the magistrate's court's a chock-a-block full of civil cases, motor car accident cases, dog licenses, fence licensing, other disputes, other crimes. Domestic violence is given a very low priority. So what we need is this. We need a dedicated domestic violence court with a dedicated magistrate who does nothing other than these cases, properly trained in trauma, as should the police be properly trained in trauma, as should the lawyers, because we're not trained in that. So we need to understand how best to treat them and give them the facility to get immediate protection.
Yeah, that's a lot, and it's all very, very pertinent. What would the barriers be that the government see in terms of establishing these kind of measures to combat this issue?
Mainly, they say it's money, and we've got money. We've got billions of dollars in our state budget, billions, and we've got a surplus of millions. Well, I could have some of that surplus, thank you very much, and I could spend that very wisely by having some refuges built, by having the electronic system instigated, by training the police and by training lawyers and magistrates and having set up a court. We can use that money. It's not as if we don't have the money, we do. It's just that the quality of the decision-making as to where to spend it is second class.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from someone who's been a victim of these certain issues in the past as well, the deterring factor for even reporting some of these cases can be the he said, she said argument. And I guess from a law enforcement perspective, if they walk into these environments and unless there's like some physical, bruising or bleeding, it does become that he said, she said. What do you suggest law enforcement and beyond, whether that's legislation or even the judiciary system, what do you suggest is incorporated to, I suppose, favour the victim a bit more or assist the victim, encourage the victim into speaking up and getting something done?
They need to be assured that they'll be safe. They need to be assured that they won't be pestered. And really, there's not much change that the police need to do, because the job of the police officer is, if he reasonably suspects that an offence has been committed, he's got the power to arrest. He's got the power to investigate. And if they walk in and everybody's laughing and having a beer and having a party, well, obviously the reasonable suspicion won't exist. But if there's a woman who's got bruising, or she's crying, or the kids are screaming, or that she shows obvious signs of distress, then a reasonable suspicion would be that she's been under assault or under threat. So they don't have to change their practice much. It's just apply it differently.
Application of common sense, really, isn't it?
You would think so. You can't imagine walking into a kitchen and not knowing, or certainly not suspecting that something's gone on here. And particularly if you've got a woman who says, he's just belted me. That's enough for a reasonable suspicion for the police to begin to act. and they can begin to act by getting the plug out.
Absolutely. So, in terms of the police themselves, you've mentioned that not much has to change in terms of their approach. Is there maybe room for a bit more training specifically for them in the areas of domestic violence, as opposed to their generalised training that they get at the academy, for example?
Absolutely, there's a crying need for that, because from the discussions I've had with some police officers, they don't enjoy this work at all. They don't regard it as, some of them, I must say, do, but some don't regard it as truly police work. And you saw a paper article a couple of days ago, there's police have got no time to fight crime. They've got no time to fight crime because they're busy trying to save women from further beatings from people who feel it's okay to beat women. So there's not that much extra training that is required. There is some, I think, but what they need is extra funding, and what they need are extra officers on the beat. And we had this pathetic discussion about a month ago where the Attorney General says we're going to be recruiting police officers. They don't have to be able to read, and they don't have to be able to add up. Well, hello, why not? You've got money to spend here. Go and recruit properly educated and willing participants. People are looking for work. And if we try hard enough, we'll be able to boost the police force. I don't think we try hard enough.
Yeah, absolutely. You see, a post for SA Police on Facebook once in a month or 2 months saying, "Oh, come and join up," be on the coast, on the countryside, and enjoy the lifestyle.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's not really a drive there. And we've had the unemployment statistics released recently, and it's gone up yet again. Why is it, do you think, that people aren't, beyond the recruiting side of things, why is it, do you think, that people aren't wanting to join the police force?
It's got to be the conditions of work.
Okay.
Conditions of work are poor. The job itself is a difficult job. I don't want to sound as if I'm criticising the police at all. I wouldn't like their job because you're dealing with these sorts of upset people all day, every day of your life. So it's a difficult job, but they need to be compensated in return for that. And if they've got decent conditions, if they've got decent pay, then maybe that's the beginning of getting a decent recruitment going. Because at the moment, people aren't going to leave a job that gives them $100,000 a year, say, for a police job that gives them 110. They're not going to do that because it's the pain of it is not worth it. So then it's a supply and demand. We need to make it worthwhile for people to want to do that.
Absolutely. It's a very interwoven issue that affects a lot of departments. There's certainly some common sense that can and should be applied as a result, but it isn't currently, just due to different priorities that the government unfortunately have.
Well, it's interesting, there is no Department of Common Sense in government.
No, there isn't. I was in the army myself, and I can say the same thing about defence. But we won't go down that tangent today.
Okay.
Now, you have recently been on tour,
Yes, we have.
for want of a better phrasing, going around various parts of the state and discussing some cases that are of interest and that do relate to these issues. The one I went to in Gawler a few months ago was the sweet old lady and the murderer mother. And were these cases chosen specifically to address the issues that women face, or it just sort of happened to pan out that way? And
unfortunately, the murders, most of the murders that I've done while in Adelaide, and I've done probably hundreds in my career, relate to women victims. That may just be circumstantial or coincidental, I don't know, but we've been all over the place. We went to Kadina and Port Pirie and Whyalla and Port Augusta. We've been to the Riverland. We've been east. And I've used those 2 or 3 cases, firstly because I was involved as the prosecutor. And I found that enabled me to give answers to questions in far more relevant detail than somebody who just read about the case. So I was actually in the courtroom and I could give descriptions of how the accused gave evidence and what he or she said in response to certain questions that were put. And that has worked very well for the audience that often come up to me and said, you know, we felt as if we're in the court with you. So I think that's probably the reason I've chosen those cases, but also probably not coincidentally, I've chosen cases where women have been the victims. It does help me then merge into the discussion about what are we doing with victims with women in our criminal justice system, how are we treating them? And it enables me then to merge into a discussion about domestic violence and tell people a few straight facts about what's happening. But it doesn't only relate to domestic violence, it relates to the offence of rape, which I often tell the audience that if I send my prosecutors out to do a trial, it could be a trial of burglary or robbery or fraud or assault, I'd expect them to come back 8 times out of 10 with a conviction. In other words, we expect an 80% success rate thereabouts. When we send our prosecutors out to do a rape trial, and this is a figure that applies across Australia because I know other officers across Australia in the DPP, I know what their figures are. We can expect no more than about 8 to 10% of convictions. In other words, about 90% of rapists, charged rapists, walk free. And the reason for that is, in a rape trial, unlike any other criminal trial, there's usually only 2 witnesses. The woman who says he raped me and the man who says, no, I didn't. And then the jury of 12 are told by the judge, each of you individually have to be satisfied beyond reasonable doubt what the truth is. When you ask 6 people, what does beyond reasonable doubt mean to you? You'll get 6 different explanations. So it's impossible for a jury of 12, when you've got 2 good witnesses, one who says yes, while the other says no, to choose who's lying. That's why they acquit. That's why they acquit in about 90% of the cases. So we need to look at that law, make it easier for women to give evidence in rape trials. And that starts from the fact that only about 20% of all criminal sexual assaults are even reported to the police. Why? Women are frightened. Women are embarrassed. Women don't want to go through the legal system and be re-victimised because that's what's happened. Mm-hmm. And so we need to look at that too.
Do you think removing the trial by jury is the way to go there then and make it judge alone?
I think that's a difficult question. I don't know whether a judge is any better in a position to determine if there are 2 good witnesses who's lying and who's telling the truth. The judge might have a better feel for it, be satisfied beyond a reasonable doubt that you're picking the right one. Is difficult for any individual, judge or not. I think what we have to do is change the standard of proof that is required to make rape a peculiar case that has its own system in which perhaps a lower standard of proof is required. And I don't mean to say that should apply right across the board in criminal trials, because, as I say, this is the only offence in which there's very rarely any other evidence but he or she. In other cases, you've got fingerprints, you might have DNA, you might have eyewitnesses, you might have any other sorts of evidence. In a rape trial, you don't get that. And so I don't know that it would necessarily make a difference by just giving it to the judge, because they too have to struggle with this concept of beyond reasonable doubt. What we've got to do is change beyond reasonable doubt to something lower.
And what do you think that criteria should be?
Look, it could be, there are a number of systems around the world that choose different standards of proof, whether it be so that you are sure or on the balance of probabilities, which is a civil case. It's interesting that in America, most rape trials are conducted in the civil courts. The victims choose to go into civil courts because they only have to establish a case on the balance of probabilities. And so they choose that. The guy doesn't get a custodial sentence. It's a monetary penalty in the civil courts. So a lot of the rape trials are conducted there because you've got a better chance of getting a result, even though the accused, convicted person doesn't go to jail. He's for a decent amount of money for the victim. I haven't satisfied myself yet that one system is better than others. Although I do know that other systems in Europe, for instance, use so that you're sure that's the test, that if you're sure in your own mind that this is what's happened, well then, okay, you can convict or you can acquit. Beyond a reasonable doubt has the problem of definition of what is reasonable and what is a doubt. And what's a reasonable doubt? We don't need all this technical terms. We need something that is much more used to people the way they think. I mean, I've got no doubt that he did it, or I've got a few doubts that he did it. Well, if you've got a few doubts, you acquit. If you've got no doubt that he did it, even though there might be a doubt about something else which is irrelevant, I'll convict. So we need to look carefully at that.
Yeah, it is very ambiguous, and I think that's what does deter people from reporting such crimes and going through that process for sure. What has been the overall reception of not only the presentations of the cases that you've done around the state, but also the advocacy work that you're doing around domestic violence when you do go out to these communities?
I have to tell you that I've been overwhelmed with the level of support. I must have spoken, even in the last couple of weeks, to maybe 400 or 500 people, and more than that prior to that. And I think I've only ever had one person raise an objection that was correct. He raised the objection that he was a victim of domestic violence. It was a male. And he corrected me properly that I didn't say at the beginning, which I subsequently have said at the beginning. I know that some men have been the victims of domestic violence, whether it's by women or whether it's by other males. I know that some men suffer. The overwhelming majority of victims are women. That's why I'm simply going to talk about victims in terms of female gender. But he reminded me that I needed to say that. Other than that man, I've had literally hundreds of people coming to me afterwards wanting to say, how can we help? And I tell them, well, you can sign up with Real Change SA, because that's what I'm going to run on in the next state elections in the upper house as an independent, to try and get those laws that we've spoken about changed. And we've had an enormous response from people prepared to sign up. I make it known to them, look, I'm not looking for money, I'm not looking for work, just a supporting signature that shows that enough of us care about this enough, I want to do something. The response has been amazing.
That's incredible. And
Yeah.
it's great to see someone doing this kind of work. And, you know, I think it's that much more powerful from a male who has such experience in the legal system to be advocating for women in this sense. It's truly a testament to your character, Steve.
Oh, thank you. But I feel an obligation in the sense that my parents were both unskilled. They both had a couple of jobs and they both worked very hard. But migrant family, or they were children of a migrant family. I was the first person in my extended family ever to go to university. And they worked hard to put me through university. And I've had now 50 years of experience. And I figure that I know as much about the criminal law, if not more, than any politician sitting in Parliament at the moment. So therefore, I have a responsibility to pay back what other people have given me, not only my parents, but all my teachers and other lawyers that I've worked with, pay back what I've been able to gather in terms of experience and knowledge. And I feel an obligation to do something. And this is what I want to do before I hang up my working gown for good.
So heading down that path now, tell me about Real Change SA.
Real Change SA is what it says. In fact, it's a hope for real change in South Australia in the manner in which we treat domestic violence victims. And it includes looking carefully at how the police conduct themselves when they visit a domestic violence scene, how the law handles victims, and the sorts of issues that are required to make sure that victims of domestic violence are treated with respect, whereas hitherto it can be pretty much a toss-up as to whether or not they're treated properly or simply ignored. Um, the essence of the dispute usually comes down to money, and it's sad to think that the society or the state doesn't feel it's got enough money to properly fund the sorts of issues that domestic violence brings up every year. Things like refuges for women, things like proper health care, and things like enough police officers to conduct proper investigations.
Fantastic. So, in terms of these refuges for women and safe spaces for them to go, perhaps even with their families as well, young kids, that sort of thing, what are you proposing is done there? Because currently it's largely based around charity organisations, isn't it, really?
Yes. So in terms of refuges, well, we need. It's a question of the decision making again of the Treasury and of government and who makes the decisions. But we need to understand that the pressures on the police who respond to 100 domestic incidents each day, 100 each day, and 9 intervention orders each day. Are significant figures, and the time spent for patrols at every incident they're called to has now stretched out to over 3 hours. So that's where our police are. And not only are they doing that sort of work, but there are 3,969 intervention order applications lodged in South Australia. That is 11 every day. The intervention order conditions were breached 2,711 times over the same period. So there's serious work to be done in enforcing the laws that already exist. And 11 intervention orders every day is a measure of the seriousness of the problem. Now, can I just give you a couple of statistics without boring everybody too much?
Do.
The statistics in relation to female domestic violence deaths are significant. In 2022, 2023, there were 75 female homicide victims, 75, which represented a 28% increase from the previous year. So the trend is significantly on the way up. In 2024, there were 74 women killed due to gender-based violence, the highest number in 9 years. And in 2025 to date, 79 women have been killed in domestic violence-related incidents, the highest ever. So what's called by the newspapers a troubling increase is an avalanche. And it's about time that we recognise that. People sometimes say that we don't spend enough money on it. In relation to 25-26 financial year, the total expenditure on the budget that the government spent was $31.2 billion. So you would have thought that out of that lot, we could have had $1 or $2 spent on the requirements for domestic violence victims. Government also has forecasted a $179 million surplus. That is money that they won't be spending. And you would have thought that sort of surplus could be properly spent in providing resources for those who are forced to seek refuge. And at the moment, they're simply not. We've got a budget that's got $31 billion in it, and we are still struggling to pay for police officers, to pay for refuges, to pay for health care, and there's no excuse for that.
That's I'm speechless with those statistics, and I think a lot of people that hear this absolutely will be. My question about the intervention orders
Yeah.
is what actually happens if someone is in breach of this? And is it seen statistically that, say, a homicide in the worst case scenario is more likely to happen after an intervention order has been placed?
I don't know about the statistics, but certainly common sense seems to indicate that, because while a woman uh, is protected once she gets an apprehended violence order in legal terms, when a person who's doing the assaulting learns that the woman has gone and taken out an AVO, what typically happens is she gets worse. She gets worse beatings. Um, so we need to understand that simply getting an AVO order doesn't guarantee anybody's safety, because often it makes the temper of the man a lot worse, because the woman had the cheek to report him for violence. And then what happens is, when a woman is waiting for an AVO order to be authorised by a magistrate, that can sometimes take a couple of weeks. So really, the answers have to be much more money spent, much more time spent on these solutions to give women immediate safety, not safety in a couple of weeks' time when the magistrates had a look at it.
Yeah, and again, that comes back to the discussion around resources and allocation of funding, and I really do want to continue to drive that home. Moving to a slightly different tangent, with this, what role does education play?
I think people have asked me, well, how do we stop this dramatic increase in violence? It's not going to stop this week or next week, or maybe not even next month, because I think the only sensible place to start is in the school, is in school classrooms. We have to teach our children that what is right and what is wrong. And when I say our children, I'm talking about kids in primary school. I'm talking about giving them 6 years in primary school where they learn basically that monkey see doesn't mean monkey do. So when they see dad bashing up somebody, that they can bash up somebody too. That can't be allowed to happen. We've got to have this differentiating sense of conduct. We can't just keep continuing to say that, it's very naughty of you to hit somebody. We've got to teach the kids from grade 1 through to grade 6, and maybe even Form 1 and Form 2, have that education embedded in their heads by the time they are in a position to make their own judgments. Now, I don't know that that's going to be the answer, but it's a beginning, because what we don't have at the moment is a sense that the kids understand that this is bad conduct, that this is unlawful conduct. It's because they've seen it happen. It's because they've heard about it happening. It's because they see it in the newspapers every day. They haven't yet taken into their own mind, their own sense of values, that it is wrong. And the only way we can do that, I think, is by starting at school age. It may be too late for the current generation, but we've got to start in the hope that the next generation will be caught early enough. That's the way I would.
I fully agree with you there. I think it's something that you used to hear all the time growing up, right? Boys will be boys, and that was just the excuse for a lot of behaviour. And it takes, you very rarely heard of consequences that would reinforce the opposite, really, the good behaviour, what you want to see.
Yeah.
And I acknowledge there that you said it might be too late for this current generation. But I also am weary that there are people that want to try and do the right thing within this generation.
Yeah.
What can these sorts of people do? A, from an education perspective, or even from an advocacy perspective, to help remedy the situation in the community?
Well, what I'm trying to do is gather enough support to make sure that if what I'm trying to do is form a political party simply based on an agenda of fixing and repairing and improving violence laws relating to domestic violence. I'm set on that, and I've managed to speak to hundreds of people around the state. As I said earlier, only one person has ever objected to what I've said, and that he was quite right that I didn't mention males. I think what we've got to do, and what people can do, is spread the word that this is no longer acceptable. A. B, at least recognise that there is a party that is dedicated to one thing, and that is to change the laws and improve the lot of women who are subject to domestic violence. And that's what I have to do. I'm not looking for a political career. I've had a career, but I am looking to do this in politics. I am looking because I think, and this may sound big-headed, but I think that my 50 years experience teaches me more than just about any other politician currently sitting in Parliament. It teaches me where the changes can be made and how they can be made and what changes need to be made. I've seen it, I've prosecuted it, I've defended it, I've heard the women's complaints, and I think I'm now in a privileged position of, if I get into Parliament, in the privileged position to have that knowledge behind me to actually achieve something. And that's what drives me. People can support me. If they are concerned about what we've been speaking about, they can support me by looking for real Stephen Pallaras Real Change SA. It's in the upper house, the Legislative Council. So I'm not in a particular seat. I'm representing the whole state. And I've been around the whole state, and the support has been enormous. So they can look to that.
And I think, as you said, and I don't think it's big-headed at all. I think it's very founded on your experience. That there's not many more with the experience that you have to combat this issue. So
Thank you.
You've certainly got a supporter within myself, and from the reception you've had across the state, it sounds like people are looking for that real change.
Yes, that's the mood that I've sensed, that people previously shook their heads saying, well, nobody's done anything. And it's true. I mean, you speak to any politician currently and you say to them, what do you think of the domestic violence situation? They say, oh, it's terrible. Yeah, very bad. We've got to do something. And I feel like screaming at the television, well, bloody well, do something. Why haven't you done something? And I don't want anybody screaming at me saying, why haven't you done something? I want to actually do it. Because I think we can. I think there is a real opportunity here, given the state of people's fed up with what we've got. There is a state ready for change. And that might stand on a few toes. Well, bad luck. Let's get this done, because we're losing far too many women and a few men every year when we don't need to.
Absolutely. So thank you very much for the insight on such a pertinent issue, not only within the state, but across the country. And it's really important and noteworthy, the work that you are doing around this. And I do encourage anyone who is watching the podcast or listening to get involved with Steve's work and the Real Change SA political party that we're looking at. You can see all the details here, and I'll be posting them in the show notes as well.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Now, I wanted to go down a slightly different path here and revisit some of your career leading up to this point, I suppose. Is there a particular case that you worked at any stage that really, I guess, shifted your perspective on the legal system?
It's a tough question. I think every case somehow shifts my perspective, because I see different people involved in the criminal justice system in different ways in which they justify what they've done or try to defend what they've done, or in some cases wrongly accused. One case that is different in that sense is I did a murder trial in Western Australia when I was a prosecutor over there. It was about a young boy. I think he was 9, perhaps 7, 8, 9, somewhere. I think 9 years of age, who used to live in Tasmania. His family had difficulties in managing him. He was a troublesome child. And so the mother and father sent him to the mother's sister over in Western Australia in the hope that a change of atmosphere and change of life might help him curtail his behaviour. In that family that he went to, there was a young baby born, and he was sleeping in a cot one day. And the mother then took the father to work. It was only a 10-minute drive. And while the two adults were out of the house, the baby was in the cot and the young boy was watching the cricket on TV. And the baby was asleep when Mum left. And when she came back, the mother couldn't raise any movement or response in the baby. It turned out that the boy was watching the cricket on the television and the baby began to cry. And he was annoyed at that and began to try and quieten the baby. And although he said he only shook her, the baby had such significant injuries that some of her internal organs had been split, which could only have been caused by him either kneeing her or jumping on this baby to try and quieten her so that he could watch the cricket. Many of her bones were broken. As I say, some of her internal organs had been split and the child was dead. Now, that gave me shivers for a start, because in Western Australia in those days, the law was a bit odd in relation to murder, because there were two different sorts of murder. One was called willful murder and the other was called murder. I charged the boy with willful murder, which was, in those days, murdering somebody intending to kill them. The other offence, the lesser offence of murder, was murdering somebody without intending necessarily to kill them, but inflicting serious harm. And I was convinced that this was, if ever there was a willful murder case, this was it. Mm. And the jury came back with a judgment of murder, not willful murder. Now, that young boy was given, I think, a 7-year detention order. And it made me wonder whether or not a person of that temperament would really be served by a detention order rather than some medical or psychological or psychiatric help, which wasn't imposed on this child. And it changed my views about child offenders. I always used to think, well, what does the kid know? He doesn't know really what he's doing. Well, this kid did. Mm. Because he lied about what he'd done to the baby. He said he only slapped her to try to keep it quiet, but the injuries in the pathology report were quite different. So if it's changed my view at all, it is that any one of us, virtually from any age, can conduct themselves knowingly in a criminal way. Mm. And it's disappointing to see kids involved in that, because I don't know what the solution is for kids that age. But it makes criminal law a fairly tortuous process sometimes when you're dealing with defendants like that.
Absolutely. It's, and you're hearing, I remember you told that story when I saw you in Galway, and, that's during the case that you were telling us about itself, the sweet old lady. And it just, as a new father now, it just sends shivers up my spine thinking about that sort of thing. Yeah. Now, you would have seen a lot of this sort of stuff, not necessarily always with kids per se, but as a prosecutor, you're seeing everything, really, aren't you?
I'm seeing the good and the bad in humanity, I think, because I was defence lawyer for some time as well. So I've had both ends of the bar tables, and I've sat on the bench as a judge. The only place I haven't been is in the dock as an accused, and I hope to keep out of that.
I think you might be pretty safe there, mate. My question about all that is, it understandably would take a bit of a mental toll. How do you look after yourself and try and keep a clear head when you're dealing with these cases and the details?
I wish I had $1 for every time I'd been asked that question, how do you cope? Because the truth is I don't know the answer. I think I'm fortunate in this sense. Some people are wired to absorb all of the bad news that emerges in a courtroom. Some people just take it in and it seems to engulf them. Sometimes also, when I first started as a barrister, you do any case that you get because you want to make a quid and eat, basically. And I would be doing criminal law, motor car accident cases, and my colleagues opted to go into family law, basically because there was huge amounts of money to be made representing a wife or a husband in family law disputes, property settlements. And indeed, one of my colleagues who did family law was one day paid by being given an island in Queensland. And that, although tempting to me, the few family law cases I had done upset me far more than a criminal case where I was defending or prosecuting. So I decided that I'm not wired to be a family lawyer because I felt sorry for the kids or I felt sorry for the mother or sometimes for the father. And I couldn't divorce myself from those emotions. Somehow, because of the particular way I'm wired, I don't have that difficulty in a criminal case. And I'm fortunate because some people are affected by it. Cases stick in your mind, but you're too busy worrying about how you're going to prepare the next case to let it linger too often. So I've been lucky. Not many cases have made me lose sleep. They have in terms of the workload, but not in terms of worrying about, what actually happened in it. Yeah. And I can only say that I'm thankful that that's how I feel. And I think you probably need to be that sort of a person with that sort of an emotional makeup to do criminal law. Because it's very different from, as I say, family law, which I could not cope with. I would lose sleep about that.
Wow, yeah, it's interesting, and certainly, as you say, it takes a special kind of person to be able to do that. You also said at the start there, if you had $1 for every time someone's asked that question, so I'm going to flip the script here a bit. What's a question that you've never been asked in an interview that you would love to have been asked? And how would you answer it?
I had lots of questions from people who want to be lawyers, who asked me, when I say people, usually from young students, and people ask me for advice. And sometimes they give me reasons that they want to do law that to me don't make sense. And I try to advise them in the best way I can about that. But something I've never been asked. I honestly can't think of something that I would want to be asked. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Perhaps, do you prefer prosecuting or defending? Because when I first started at the bar, I was a defence counsel, and I felt that I was on the right side of righteousness, defending people who are inevitably said that they were falsely accused, and I got pleasure out of it, getting them an acquittal if I did. But I got a bit tired of people who were obviously lying to me, and I didn't feel comfortable any longer in continuing a career that involved telling stories that I didn't believe in. And as a defence lawyer, you don't have to, even though your client tells you what is apparently, to your view, a lie. Your job is not to judge that. Your job is to put that story to the court. And people don't understand. They ask you as a defence lawyer, how do you sleep at night? You know, can you put that rubbish? Well, that's your job, is to put what your client tells you, not what you think. You might think he's as guilty as sin. But if your client tells you that he's not, that's your job, is to put that to the court. Prosecuting is a different game altogether. And it sat better with me intellectually, I think, because I had a victim in front of me and I could judge whether or not there was sufficient evidence to form a prosecution about that. It gave me more control over the sorts of decision-making that I had to make, because I could decide that there's not enough evidence and we wouldn't prosecute. Whereas at the defence counsel, you don't have that choice. If he comes to you and says, I want you to defend me, that's your job.
Yeah.
So I suppose I haven't really spoken much about the different intellectual challenges that are involved in defending as opposed to prosecuting, but that's probably the best as I can summarise it.
Makes a lot of sense. I don't know how I'd go sort of pushing whatever someone said, even though you read it as a lie. So it's, yeah, again, takes a bit of character, doesn't it?
Well, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a challenge because you've got to really understand your role, and you don't really understand your role until you've been around the traps a few years. And people, as I say, often, in one case I was involved in, we had people in the audience yelling to my opponent who was defending in a murder trial, how do you sleep at night? You're defending murderers. And that's the misunderstanding, is that's the job that a defence counsel has to do. No matter what he thinks about the defence, if your client tells you he didn't do it, that's your job. Tell the court you didn't do it. So that's about as best as I can answer your question.
Yeah, fantastic. No, it's a good insight. And yeah, good to see both perspectives of the prosecution and the defence there as well. Just got a couple more questions for you before we'll start to wrap up. If you could speak to someone living or dead who has significantly impacted your career, be that positively or negatively, who would that be and what would you say?
It would have to be both of my parents.
Yeah.
Because they worked very hard to give me the education that I was lucky enough to get. And I'd like them to know both my parents died within 6 months of each other. And fortunately, in one sense, Mum and Dad saw me become a Queen's Counsel. That was in the year 2000, and they both passed in that year. So I'm glad that they saw the success of their progeny before they passed. But I've had a lot of success since then, and I'd like to share that with them if I could, so that they knew that all their hard work was worthwhile. And unfortunately, that's not possible with current technology, but one day we might be able to chat about that.
Potentially, for sure. But I've got no doubt that they would be absolutely proud of you and the man you are and the work you've done.
Thank you.
It's been, a great experience for me, learning all about yourself and, even attending that event a couple of months ago now. And I look forward to continuing to follow your journey with Real Change SA and with everything that you're working towards.
Thanks, Trav.
One last one today is a bit of an open-ended one, but is there anything that we haven't covered today that you'd like to leave us with before we do finish up?
I think what has motivated me to this point in my career about domestic violence is that nobody has done anything. I would like the public to be able to, or to decide to put more pressure on those representing them to actually earn their money and do something. There's too many people who sit back and say, well, what can we do? We can all do something. We can all put pressure on our candidates by asking them, for instance, how many domestic violence cases occurred in your electorate this year? If the answer is, I don't know, the response should be, why the hell don't you know? Why the hell don't you know? Or what have you done in relation to any domestic violence cases this year? and listen to the answer, and inevitably it will be not enough. Why haven't you done more? I would like to encourage people to be active in putting pressure on our representatives, because they are people who have been elected to do a job. And it strikes me, which is what's motivating me, that they've done nothing.
Mm.
And if I am successful in getting it, I'd love people to come up and ask me that question and be in a position to say, well, we've done A, B, C, and D. So far, nobody can say that. That's it.
Absolutely. No, I strongly echo those sentiments there, and I think we all have that power to, I suppose, advocate and put pressure on our representatives, and I think it's honest to do that. It's got to start somewhere, doesn't it?
I think so. And that can only get people moving.
Mm.
And from where they are stationary at the moment, that's got to be an improvement.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure being welcomed into your home, and thank you as well for the gift there for our little Henley, our newborn son.
How did the name Henley come about?
Lots of ways, really. Henley Beach itself is a special place for me. It actually means high meadow. It's an old English name, and that's where we did our birth announcement, or our pregnancy announcement. And my partner's got English heritage, so
fantastic.
Few different things there, but certainly a unique one. And he's just a beautiful boy.
You should look forward to years of happiness and a few headaches, but years of happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
it's been a pleasure to talk.
It's been absolutely unreal. And if you do want to follow Steve or get in touch with him, he's Stephen Pallaras on Instagram and Facebook. Or, as he mentioned earlier, just Google the Real Change SA Party and you'll be pointed in the right direction there. Steve, thank you so much once again.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute privilege to be here, and I look forward to seeing what you're able to do.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, legends, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.